You know, when we usually think about ancient, thousands of years old religious traditions, we tend to picture like a sealed museum.
Right. A totally static museum.
Yeah. You walk in, the artifacts are perfectly preserved behind this really thick bulletproof glass. The lighting is carefully controlled to prevent any fading, and there are velvet ropes everywhere.
Oh, yeah, with little signs whispering, do not touch.
Exactly. You can admire the history. I mean, you can study it, you can even revere it, but you certainly cannot take a hammer and chisel to the marble statues.
Because it's fixed. It's pristine. The entire point of the museum is to freeze time, really, keeping those artifacts completely separated from the messy, evolving, completely unpredictable reality of the world outside those heavy oak doors.
But imagine you step into one specific room in this museum, and suddenly the velvet ropes are just gone.
Yeah.
The glass cases are shattered, and in their place, you're looking at a bustling, noisy, open-air workshop.
I love that image.
There are ancient, dusty tools scattered on the tables, right alongside brand-new, modern blueprints. People are actively picking up the sacred artifacts. They're examining them under a microscope, reshaping them, melting some of them down, and literally putting them to use in real time.
Which is pretty much the absolute definition of treating an ancient inheritance not as a fragile relic to be guarded, but as a living project to be built.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are exploring a profoundly fascinating philosophical and psychological landscape that is entirely tailor-made for your specific curiosity. We are exploring the world of Reconstructionist Judaism.
Yes, we are.
And we're going to look at this not just as like a historical quirk, but through a really unique psychological lens. If you're the kind of person who loves world building, if you have that creative, relentlessly curious personality type that we might call the Tommy archetype, you're going to find a playground designed specifically for your brain.
Today's journey is really about understanding a massive civilization-level tension. I mean, we're talking about the intense friction between ancient, inherited tradition and modern scientific democratic thought.
Which is something everywhere.
Exactly. Every global religion is facing this exact crisis right now. But we're going to look at how one highly specific, incredibly innovative group of people attempted to solve that puzzle about a century ago, and why their solution acts like a total magnet for creative mindsets today.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into the psychology of why this appeals to the world builders and the creative, we need to set the stage.
Right. The historical context is everything here.
Yeah, we are going to explore the historical crisis that birthed this movement, look at its radically democratic approach to God and law, and sort of map out where it sits in the broader religious ecosystem. So let's rewind the clock. Take us back to the Crucible where this all started. We are in early 20th century New York.
So the 1920s and 1930s in America, specifically in the really dense, immigrant-heavy neighborhoods of New York, were a time of immense intellectual and cultural whiplash.
Whiplash is a great word for it.
It really was. You have this whole generation of Jewish immigrants who brought an incredibly thick, rich, traditional way of life over from Eastern Europe.
Right.
But their children, they're growing up in America, they are going to secular universities, they're reading Charles Darwin.
Oh, wow, yeah. That's a shift.
It's massive. They are studying historical criticism of the Bible, which suggests, the texts were written by regular humans over centuries, not handed down literally by God on a mountain.
That is a recipe for a massive generational and psychological collision. I mean, you're reading about the fossil record and the theory of evolution on a Tuesday, and then on Saturday, you're sitting in the synagogue being told that the universe was created in 6 literal days.
Exactly. Or that a sea literally parted to let your ancestors walk through it.
Right. Imagine the psychological weight of that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. It's heavy. Because you are a modern person. The literal claims of your faith, supernatural revelation, physical miracles, the concept of being a uniquely genetically chosen people, and the belief in a binding, divinely dictated legal code, those things are just no longer intellectually persuasive to you.
Your brain just fundamentally rejects them.
It does. It has to, based on everything else you're learning about the physical world.
But wait, why not just leave then? I mean, that's what millions of people did and still do today. When the supernatural claims stop making sense, you just stop going to the services. You assimilate. You just become a secular American.
That is the crucial friction here. They didn't want to leave.
Really?
Yeah. The secular world felt kind of cold and atomized to them. They desperately wanted to keep the thick, communal, and sacred aspects of Jewish life.
They loved the culture.
Exactly. They loved the cadence of the Hebrew language, the smell of the food, the rhythm of the holidays, the deep sense of historical belonging. They just couldn't force themselves to believe things their modern minds rejected.
So it wasn't about apathy at all.
Not at all. It was an intellectual crisis of integrity. The question was, do you live a double life, pretending in the synagogue and being a modern citizen on the street?
Enter Rabbi Mordecai M. Kaplan.
Enter Mordecai Kaplan. He is a brilliant, highly educated rabbi living right in the absolute center of this storm, and he refuses the binary choice.
He won't pick a side.
He refuses to say, either shut off your modern brain and believe the miracles or walk away and lose your entire heritage. He spends the 1920s crystallizing a third way.
Which he eventually publishes, right?
Yes, in a massive, earth-shattering 1934 book called Judaism as a Civilization.
Okay, so how does he square that circle? Because if you take away the literal miracles, the supernatural events, and the idea that God is directly handing you a binding legal code, doesn't the religion just evaporate into like a glorified social club?
That is the exact question everyone asks.
We're like a historical preservation society where you just get together to eat bagels and talk about the old country.
Yes, and that was the exact accusation hurled at him by his traditionalist contemporaries. They thought he was completely gutting the religion.
I mean, it sounds like he was.
But Kaplan's genius was that he didn't just strip away the supernatural elements and leave an empty shell. He replaced the entire foundation of the building while somehow keeping the structure intact.
Okay, I'm following.
He shifted the center of gravity from supernatural divine intervention to the collective life of a people.
Let's make that concrete for a second. What does shifting the foundation actually look like in practice?
Well, he looked at religion through the lens of sociology and anthropology.
Right.
In his view, religion doesn't just drop down from the sky fully formed on stone tablets. It emerges organically from the dirt, the lived experience, the history, and the culture of a highly specific group of people.
It's a bottom-up thing, not top-down.
Exactly. Participating in the religion isn't about submitting to a supernatural checklist anymore. It's about engaging deeply with the collective civilization of your people.
So he creates a mechanism to modernize the tradition without destroying it. And there's a phenomenal, tangible moment in history that perfectly illustrates this. I want to talk about this scene from May of 1922.
Oh, yes, at the Society for the Advancement of Judaism.
Right, which was Kaplan's own synagogue, effectively his laboratory for these wild new ideas. And the subject of this huge experiment was his own daughter, Judith Kaplan.
The first bat mitzvah.
The very first bat mitzvah ceremony in the modern Jewish world. Which is wild to think about, honestly, considering how universal it is today.
It really is.
You go to any liberal or even moderately traditional synagogue now, and a 13-year-old girl reading from the Torah is just standard practice. But in 1922, women did not do this.
No, the ancient structure had absolutely no mechanism for a woman to publicly lead the congregation in this way.
So what does Kaplan do?
Kaplan looks at this ancient structure, and then he looks at his modern democratic values. The modern world is slowly waking up to the truth of gender equality, right?
Yeah.
Kaplan decides that this modern truth is valid. But instead of saying, the ancient tradition is sexist, therefore I am completely abandoning the tradition.
Which a lot of people would do.
Exactly. Instead of doing that, he says, we are going to take the ancient tools, the ancient language, and the ancient scrolls, and we are going to build a brand new room in this house.
He literally hacks the system. He reconstructs the tradition in real time. But to do that, to have the audacity to just invent a new ritual and claim it as authentic, he really had to redefine the very word Judaism.
He had to give the whole enterprise a totally new operating system.
Right, he had to change the dictionary definition. The cornerstone of his entire philosophy, the phrase that basically defines the whole movement, is that Judaism is an evolving religious civilization.
An evolving religious civilization, not just a religion, a civilization. Let's break that down, because a religion implies a creed.
Yeah, a list of beliefs.
Right. A civilization encompasses peoplehood. It's the Hebrew and Yiddish languages. It's the ethics, the connection to the land, the culture, the art, the food, the inside jokes, the communal life.
It's the whole package.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is the totality of a people's experience, not just their abstract doctrines or theological laws.
The implications of moving from a religion to a civilization are honestly staggering when you think about how human beings organize themselves.
Totally. Because think about it. In a traditional religious framework, the boundary line is belief.
Right. You must believe X, Y, and Z to be inside the circle.
Exactly. If you stop believing that Jesus rose from the dead or that Moses received the literal Torah at Sinai, you have stepped outside the circle. You're out.
But a civilization functions completely differently.
How so? Walk me through your thought process.
Well, you belong to a civilization through participation, right? Shared memory, culture. Think about being American or French. You don't have to hold a specific metaphysical belief to be part of the French civilization.
Right. You don't have to believe the ghost of Napoleon is watching you.
Exactly. You just have to participate in the culture. Kaplan shifts the boundary for inclusion. It becomes about covenantal participation rather than doctrinal conformity.
Which is huge. This allows someone to walk into the synagogue, participate deeply, sing the songs passionately, and genuinely belong, even if their personal theology is a complete mess.
Even if they don't know if they believe in God at all.
Because the goal isn't theological purity anymore. The goal is the continuation and evolution of the civilization itself.
You know, it sounds exactly like how software developers treat open source software.
Oh, that is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. I love that. Unpack that analogy for me.
Okay, so think about something like Linux or any massive open source project. The original code, which would be the ancient texts, the history, the rabbinic laws, that gives you this incredibly powerful foundation.
The legacy code?
Yeah, the legacy code. Gets a massive vote in how the program runs. You don't just go in and delete the core kernel when everything crashes. But the current users, the living community developers, they hold the administrative rights. If a piece of code is causing bugs in the modern operating system, like, say, a lack of gender equality, the community can submit a patch.
Oh, wow.
They can update it. They can rewrite parts of the code that no longer function. The past provides the foundation, but it doesn't get to freeze the software.
That open source concept maps flawlessly onto the most famous Reconstructionist catchphrase.
What's the phrase?
The past has a vote, but not a veto.
Ah, a vote, but not a veto. That's so good.
It's brilliant. The ancestors get a seat at the table, we listen to them, we study their code, we revere their wisdom, but they do not hold veto power over the living community.
Which completely reframes the whole idea of doubting your religion. In a sealed museum religion, questioning the artifacts is basically a sin. It's a sign of weak faith.
Right. You're a heretic.
But in an open source religion, finding bugs in the code is literally your job.
Yes. It inherently encourages sacred questioning. Wrestling with the tradition isn't a failure. It is elevated to a central religious act. If the past only has a vote, then the community must engage in the democratic process of figuring out how to cast the other votes.
You have to do the work.
Exactly. You are actively encouraged to bring your modern ethics, your scientific knowledge, and your deep skepticism directly to the text. That friction is how the civilization evolves.
So what does this actually look like on a random Tuesday or during a major holiday? Let's talk about Passover. A Reconstructionist community isn't throwing out Passover, right? They aren't saying, well, the parting of the Red Sea probably didn't happen historically, so let's just order pizza.
Far from it. They will hold a deeply traditional-looking Passover Seder.
Okay.
There will be matzah, bitter herbs, ancient Hebrew chanting. It will look very authentic, but the meaning-making underneath the ritual is updated.
Like a new software patch.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on the literal supernatural plagues raining down on Egypt from a wrathful God, the community might interpret the Exodus narrative through an ethical lens of modern liberation movements.
Oh, that makes sense.
They might discuss modern human trafficking or reframe the plagues as an ecological warning about what happens when humanity endlessly exploits the earth. The rituals remain recognizable, but the patch applied by the community makes it intensely relevant to the present moment.
Okay, if the code is open source, the natural question for anyone listening is, how do the other major developers in the Jewish world manage their software? How does Reconstructionism actually fit into the broader ecosystem of Judaism today?
Right. To understand how radical this is, we really have to map out the whole landscape. And we can use a phenomenal architectural analogy from the source material.
Let's hear it.
Let's imagine the entirety of Judaism as a vast, ancient, historic city. We are going to walk through the different neighborhoods to understand how they view Jewish law, which is called halakha, and how they handle the tension of modernity.
Let's take the tour. I guess we start in the Orthodox neighborhood.
We do. In our city analogy, Orthodoxy views the city as a literal divine creation. The blueprints were handed down directly by God at Mount Sinai. Therefore, the city must be preserved exactly as it is.
Because God built it.
Exactly. Jewish law is an absolutely binding divine command.
So no bulldozing the historic buildings, no changing the zoning laws just because you feel like it.
Change is extremely slow, if it happens at all, and it must be justified entirely through established ancient legal precedent. You cannot introduce a modern value unless you can find a rabbinic text from 1,000 years ago that supports it.
Okay, so then we walk a few blocks over into the conservative Judaism neighborhood. And this is actually where Mordecai Kaplan started, right?
Yes.
He was a rabbi at the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the flagship institution of conservative Judaism.
Right. So the conservative neighborhood believes in careful renovation. They believe that Jewish law is binding, but they acknowledge that it has historically evolved.
So they allow for some change.
They do, however, that evolution is managed strictly from the top down. It is handled by elite rabbinic scholars who adapt the law to modern life carefully, step by step. The community doesn't just get to vote on changes.
The scholars make the rulings.
Yes, the experts are in charge of the renovation.
Got it. Then we cross town to the Reform Judaism neighborhood. This is the progressive wing.
In the Reform neighborhood, they are actively tearing down old structures and building modern buildings using old inspiration.
So it's much more autonomous.
Very much so. The focus shifts heavily away from binding law and toward individual autonomy and universal ethics. The traditional Jewish laws like keeping kosher or strictly observing the Sabbath are mostly seen as optional.
The traditions are beautiful, they provide meaning, but the individual has the ultimate authority to choose what to observe.
Exactly.
And finally, we arrive at the Reconstructionist neighborhood. Their approach to the city is entirely unique. They treat the historic city as a living civilization that the people rebuild together.
The key word there is together. The breakaway point from conservative Judaism is structural. It was moving from the conservative view of rabbinic authority interprets the binding law for the people to the Reconstructionist view of the communities democratically decide their own practice.
And the law is just a cultural resource, not a binding command.
Exactly.
Wait, but how is that different from Reform Judaism? I mean, if I walk into a Reform synagogue and a Reconstructionist synagogue today, they both look incredibly progressive.
They do.
They both have female rabbis. They both welcome LGBTQ members. They both care deeply about social justice. What's the actual difference?
Socially, they look like twins, but philosophically, they're approaching the building from totally different angles. Historically, Reform Judaism focused heavily on the individual. What do I find meaningful? What is the universal ethical lesson here?
Right.
Reconstructionism is profoundly focused on the collective peoplehood. It's not just about universal ethics, it's about the specific cultural survival of the Jewish civilization.
So they might keep more of the traditional stuff.
Yes. They are much more likely to retain traditional Hebrew liturgy, traditional folk practices, and the deep cultural rhythms, not because God commanded it, but because that is the language of their ancestors.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And we also have to contrast them with humanistic Judaism, right? Because there is a branch of Judaism that just said, let's drop the God talk entirely.
Yes, humanistic Judaism is explicitly atheistic.
Yeah.
They view Judaism purely as a human, cultural, and historical tradition. They actually remove references to a deity from their liturgy completely.
Oh, wow. But Reconstructionism doesn't do that.
No. Reconstructionism allows for non-theistic views, but it crucially retains the spiritual language, the poetry, the mystery, and the traditional liturgy. They don't strip out the poetry of the sacred just because they've stopped reading it literally.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. If I'm a Reconstructionist and I've fully admitted that the law isn't a direct divine command,
Right.
and I've admitted that we are just sort of interpreting and changing things as we go, why on earth would I believe my way is the most authentic way to practice? Why not just be orthodox and have the comfort of absolute certainty?
Because the Reconstructionist looks at the orthodox claim of an unchanging city and says, we have the historical receipts. The city has never been frozen.
Oh, they call their bluff.
Completely. They don't view themselves as a modern anomaly breaking the rules. They view themselves as the most historically honest movement. They argue that Judaism has always evolved drastically.
Give me an example of that historic evolution. Like, when did it change before?
Look at the massive shift from biblical Judaism to rabbinic Judaism. For centuries, the entire religion centered around a literal physical temple in Jerusalem, animal sacrifices, and a hereditary priesthood.
Right, that's what you read about in the Old Testament.
Exactly. But when the Roman Empire destroyed that temple in the year 70 CE, the religion was thrown into an existential crisis. The early rabbis essentially reconstructed the religion.
They had to.
They replaced animal sacrifice with verbal prayer. They replaced the hereditary priests with merit-based scholars. They replaced the physical temple with the local synagogue.
That is a massive software update. I mean, that is an entirely new operating system.
Exactly. The Reconstructionist argument is that change isn't a betrayal of the tradition. Conscious, adaptive change is the very mechanism of survival.
So they're just doing what the rabbis did 2,000 years ago.
The only difference is that earlier generations pretended the changes were just uncovering what was there all along.
Oh.
Reconstructionists are just the first ones to do it out loud, with full transparency.
Let's tackle the elephant in the room. This idea of rebuilding the city together relies entirely on the people doing the rebuilding.
It does.
If there is no top-down divine command, no singular pope or ruling council handing down the absolute truth, who is actually in charge? And maybe more fundamentally, if they aren't relying on supernatural revelation, what do they actually believe about God?
This takes us into the most mind-bending part of their philosophy, their theology. It is radically flexible and uniquely non-creedal.
Okay, lay it on me.
Let's start with Mordecai Kaplan's original baseline. Kaplan forcefully rejected the traditional idea of a supernatural, interventionist man in the sky. He didn't believe in a deity who suspends the laws of physics to part seas, cure diseases, or dictate legal texts to prophets.
If you take away the guy on the throne pulling the levers of the universe, what do you replace it with?
He described God not as a being, but as a force. He defined God as the power or process in the universe that makes for human salvation, growth, and ethical becoming.
The power or process in the universe. That sounds like he's describing gravity or like an ecological web, but infused with a moral direction.
Yes, that's exactly it.
It's God as an active force of human flourishing. It's the impulse that makes a seed grow into a tree, or the impulse that makes human beings seek justice.
It is a highly naturalistic theology. God isn't a person you petition for favors. God is the reality you tap into when you act ethically or build community. But while Kaplan was a strict naturalist, the movement today has evolved into a massive theological tent.
How vast is the internal diversity today? Like, who is actually sitting in the pews?
You will find congregations that include strict naturalists who follow Kaplan's exact view. You will find panentheists who believe the universe is a part of God, but God is larger than the universe.
Okay.
You will find religious humanists who are effectively atheists, but just love the ritual. And remarkably, you will find people who maintain a fairly conventional, traditional theology of a personal God who actually listens to prayer.
Wait, hold on. Put me in that room for a second. If the guy to my left thinks God is a literal listening entity, the woman to my right is a strict naturalist who thinks God is just a metaphor for human ethics, and I'm a non-theist who just likes the singing. How is this not theological chaos?
Right. How does it hold together?
Yeah. How are we reading the same ancient Hebrew prayer book without it feeling entirely hypocritical for at least two of us?
This is where the sociological genius of the movement does the heavy lifting. Think about how most Western religions operate. Belief is the glue.
Right.
If you are Catholic or evangelical, your membership is largely predicated on assenting to a specific creed. If you stop believing the creed, the entire structure collapses, and you eventually leave. In Reconstructionism, the glue isn't belief.
So what is it?
The glue is shared practice and communal belonging. It is a principled ecosystem, not a rigid ideology.
So the ritual is the connective tissue. The melody of the song is more important than everyone agreeing on the dictionary definition of the lyrics.
Exactly. When that diverse group of people stands up to sing an ancient prayer, the words are the same, but the individual meaning-making happening inside their heads is entirely autonomous. The traditionalist is speaking to a personal creator. The naturalist is meditating on the interconnectedness of human life. The atheist is feeling a profound connection to the generations of ancestors who sang that exact melody in times of joy and terror.
They're all doing different things internally, but doing the same thing externally.
Yes. The ultimate goal isn't theological uniformity. The goal is the act of being together, doing the work of the civilization. They are entirely comfortable with historical messiness and theological imperfection.
So this creates a massive shift in the individual's moral compass, right?
Yeah.
If you aren't chasing doctrinal purity, the whole question changes. You're no longer asking, am I obeying a fixed divine legal code so I don't get punished?
That's right.
You're asking, am I helping create a Jewish life and a world worthy of human dignity?
It shifts their focus entirely to the present tense. Traditional religions often center a massive amount of their theological weight on the afterlife, right?
Securing a spot in heaven? Avoiding hell, preparing for bodily resurrection.
Right. Reconstructionism has very little interest in the afterlife. The intense laser focus is on this worldly holiness.
The concept of tikkun olam, the repair of the world.
Yes.
It's about legacy. It's about social justice, ethical action, and environmental stewardship right now in this life.
And that earthly focus is reflected in how they actually govern themselves. There is no top-down bishop. The authority rests in the democratic structure of the community. They rely heavily on the Havura ethos.
What's a havura?
A Havura is a small, collaborative fellowship group. These communities vote on their own liturgy, they collaboratively decide on ritual adaptations, and they argue over their social justice priorities. It's radical, bottom-up, collaborative governance.
We spent a long time in the philosophical clouds here, the sociology, the theology, the metaphors. Let's bring this down to the ground. How has this movement actually functioned in the real world? What is its actual footprint?
When we look at the raw numbers, the footprint seems tiny. Numerically, it is the smallest of the major Jewish denominations. We are talking about roughly 50,000 affiliated people and a little over 100 synagogues and havuro, primarily concentrated in North America.
50,000 people. I mean, in the grand scheme of global religions, with billions of adherents, that is a micro-movement. It's a rounding error.
Numerically, yes, but its cultural and intellectual impact has been disproportionately massive.
How so?
Because of Kaplan's initial role teaching the rabbis of the much larger conservative movement, and because the Reconstructionist College basically functions as a sort of intellectual R&D department, they have been the laboratory for future Jewish practices that have swept across the rest of the world.
They are the beta testers for liberal religion.
Precisely. Ideas that were considered radical fringe experiments when Reconstructionists first tried them are now just standard mainstream practice across almost all of liberal Judaism.
Like the bat mitzvah.
We already talked about the bat mitzvah, yeah. But they were also the early pioneers of full gender equality in all aspects of synagogue life. They were ordaining openly LGBTQ rabbis long before it was widely accepted elsewhere.
Really ahead of the curve.
They were pioneers in welcoming interfaith families into the core of communal life and establishing democratic, non-hierarchical synagogue governance.
Because they have that open source operating system, they don't have to wait for a 500-year-old legal precedent to address a modern problem. They can just write the patch.
Right. They apply a values-based decision-making process. If a uniquely modern issue arises, complex questions around end-of-life care with modern medical technology or navigating gender identity transitions or systemic racial justice, they don't scour the ancient Talmud trying to force a square peg into a round hole.
They don't try to find a ruling on ventilators from the year 400.
Exactly. They use explicit modern ethical frameworks combined with the spirit of the ancient text to create a response.
Let's give a concrete example of this modern innovation. What does it look like when they create something totally new today?
A great example is their embrace of the digital age, specifically platforms like RitualWell. RitualWell is basically an open-source digital database of modern liturgy.
Okay, how does it work?
Let's say someone goes through a uniquely modern experience that the ancient rabbis obviously never wrote a prayer for. Maybe it's the specific grief of a failed IVF treatment, or the psychological weight of paying off massive student loan debt.
The ancient texts definitely have nothing to say about student loans.
Right. Or the joy of legally changing your name during a gender transition. A Reconstructionist rabbi or layperson will take the architecture of ancient ritual, maybe a traditional blessing format, or the use of a mikveh, a ritual bath, and they will write a brand new ritual for that exact modern moment.
That's incredible.
They upload it, the community uses it, adapts it, and suddenly the ancient civilization is stretched to cover the modern psychological reality.
So what does this all mean? If we step back and look at the trajectory of this, it maps perfectly onto the modern cultural zeitgeist. Think about the world we live in right now. Institutional trust is completely collapsing globally.
It really is.
People are deeply skeptical of top-down authority, whether it's in politics, media, or religion. Yet simultaneously, we have a massive, well-documented epidemic of loneliness. People are desperate for thick, meaningful community.
It is the perfect storm. The older generations might have joined an institution out of sheer obligation, but younger generations view religion entirely differently. They view it as what sociologists call a post-ethnic and consent-based identity.
Consent-based identity. Let's linger on that.
Mhm.
It means I am not sitting in this pew simply because my grandfather sat in this pew. I am participating because I have actively interrogated the values of this community, and I am actively choosing to consent to them. I am opting in.
Yes. It is chosen and practiced, not just passively inherited like an eye color. Reconstructionism meets this individualized, skeptical culture exactly where it is. It doesn't ask you to check your skepticism at the door. It says, bring your skepticism in here. Let's use it to build something.
If you were raised in this tradition today, it's not an extreme separatist lifestyle. You aren't cutting yourself off from secular art or science.
No, not at all.
The lived experience is a daily rhythm. You might have a beautiful, traditional Shabbat dinner on Friday night, lighting the candles and singing the Hebrew blessings.
Yeah.
But around that very same dinner table, you are having a fierce, open debate about the ethics of the Torah portion, or arguing about current political justice.
It's an environment where questions are actively praised.
Right. A child asking a difficult, challenging question isn't shushed for being disrespectful. They are praised for engaging in the tradition.
Which brings us to the psychological profile. Why does this highly specific, intellectual, open-source approach appeal so strongly to certain people?
You're listening to this and you're someone who loves world building. If you have that Tommy personality type where you are relentlessly curious, you love synthesizing complex systems, and you crave meaningful creativity, this is a framework built for you. Think about people who love coding, or writing expansive fantasy lore, or exploring deep philosophical systems.
Let's look at the psychological worldview of Reconstructionism. Many traditional Western religions operate on a baseline assumption of human brokenness, concepts like original sin, or the idea that humans are inherently depraved and require supernatural rescue.
Right.
Reconstructionism totally flips that script. They view human beings as fundamentally capable of growth, responsibility, and moral repair.
The central problem of humanity, in their eyes, isn't that we are born sinful. The problem is alienation. It's passivity. It's a loss of meaning, a disconnection from community, and a failure to take responsibility for the world.
Therefore, the virtues they prize most highly aren't blind obedience or perfect faith. The highest virtues are intellectual honesty, lifelong learning, deep compassion, and this is the magic key for the creative mind, the courage to faithfully reinterpret tradition.
The courage to faithfully reinterpret. That is world building. That is exactly what a creative persona does. They take raw materials and they build a new world. Myers-Briggs types like INTPs, INFPs, ENFPs, the philosophers, the artists, the academics, they thrive here because it satisfies two massive, often competing human desires.
The desire for rootedness and the desire for freedom.
Yes. We all want to feel like we belong to a story larger and older than ourselves. We want the gravitas of a multi-millennial history. That's the rootedness. But we also want the intellectual freedom to not pretend to have certainty when we don't feel it. We want the autonomy to shape the story, to use our own voice.
Reconstructionism transforms that sealed religious vault we talked about at the very beginning into an active workshop. It tells a creative mind, here are the ancient tools. They are heavy, they are profound, and they are yours. Now help us build the next era of this civilization. Embrace the uncertainty.
It's no wonder that people who convert to Judaism are often heavily drawn to this specific movement. They are actively seeking Jewish identity, culture, and rhythm, but they have zero interest in fundamentalism.
Right.
They want strong egalitarian values, they want rigorous intellectual honesty, and they want a community-oriented spirituality over strict, rigid dogma. It allows them to be intellectually skeptical, spiritually curious, and culturally rooted all at the exact same time.
It is an incredibly rare combination in the landscape of global religion, a tradition that demands your reverence but absolutely refuses your blind obedience.
Let's take a breath and look at the massive landscape we've just covered. We started over a century ago in the crowded, intellectually turbulent streets of New York with Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan staring down the crushing, inevitable weight of modernity.
He really was at the center of it all.
He watched a generation tearing themselves apart between ancient faith and modern science, and he saved a tradition by shifting its entire foundation from supernatural revelation to the sociology of a living people.
We explored the radical, paradigm-shifting idea that the past has a vote but not a veto. We saw how that single phrase transformed the operating system of an ancient religion into something resembling a dynamic, open source project.
We walked the streets of the historic city of Jewish movements. We saw how Reconstructionism evolved out of the conservative neighborhood to hand the architectural blueprints directly to the people.
And we waded through the beautiful, chaotic, vibrant mess of a theology without dogma, where naturalists, atheists, and traditionalists can stand shoulder to shoulder, singing the same ancient song because the survival of the community is more important than the uniformity of the creed.
We saw how a micro-movement of just 50,000 people functioned as a fearless laboratory, beta testing practices like the bat mitzvah and LGBTQ inclusion that changed the landscape of liberal religion forever.
And finally, we looked at the psychology of it all. We discovered a psychological haven for the world builders, the creatives, and the insanely curious, the people who crave the deep, grounding roots of an ancient story, but demand the absolute freedom to write the next chapter themselves.
Which leaves us with a final, massive thought to ponder. We've seen how Reconstructionist Judaism was explicitly born to solve the agonizing friction between ancient texts and modern scientific realities.
Yeah.
It survived the 20th century by explicitly turning religion into an open-source, evolving civilization. But if we look beyond just this one movement and look at the trajectory of human society, is this the inevitable endpoint for all global religions?
Oh, wow. That is a heavy, world-shifting question.
Right?
Think about the mechanics of the modern world. We live in a hyper-connected, post-ethnic environment where identity is increasingly chosen. The tension between ancient dogma and modern scientific and democratic realities is not slowing down. It is accelerating exponentially.
It's everywhere.
Will every ancient religious institution, from the Vatican to Mecca to Salt Lake City, eventually be forced into this exact crucible? Will they all eventually have to tell their followers that the past gets a vote, but not a veto, just to survive the next century?
That is a profound thought to chew on. And it brings us right back to the doors of the museum. Do the guardians of these traditions keep the museum sealed, polishing the glass cases until the visitors finally stop coming entirely? Or do they shatter the glass, hand the visitors the tools, and invite them into the workshop to start building?
That's the choice.
Thank you so much for bringing such a rich, thought-provoking topic to the table today. Keep diving deep, keep asking those sacred, difficult questions, and keep building your own intellectual city. We'll catch you on the next Deep Dive.